are drawn to certain places, people, and times, as though they hold some special significance for us. By all accounts, H. Spencer Lewis was drawn to the Monterey Bay and Carmel Valley areas, coming here repeatedly to study and to meditate. He would sit for hours on this hillside overlooking the bay, contemplating the past, the present, and the future. From this area and elsewhere, he imagined and created the framework for transplanting the mystical ideals of Europe into American soil to become the Rosicrucian order, Amorc, which later spread outward around the world. On the heels of Francis Bacon and many others, Lewis created a Rosicrucian order to house and distribute the philosopher's stone freely to a free people, to those with the imagination and the resourcefulness to seek it. Amorc, Chromat, the truth will set you free. It is this legacy that we celebrate today. Ladies and gentlemen, fratres and sorors, honored guests, we are pleased to have with us today the Grand Master of the Rosicrucian Order and President of the English Grand Lodge for the Americas, Julie Scott, who will present a mystical program in celebration of this occasion. Following her program, please board the bus by 11:15 so we can drive inland and meet for lunch. Now please welcome Grand Master Julie Scott.
Fratres and sorors, dear friends, I greet you with the Rosicrucian sign. It is not only a pleasure for me to be with all of you today, it's a great honor. As Grand Master, I'm here to lead us in a mystical experiment, and as a soror of the Rosy Cross, I'm thrilled to be part of this weekend celebration honoring those mystics who have come here over the centuries. In 1915, along with 8 other fratres and sorors, the Rosicrucian Order Amorc was officially charted and became an organization first based in New York. A few years after this, a member in San Francisco invited H. Spencer Lewis to come to California to consider the possibility of moving the headquarters of the order from New York to San Francisco. While H. Spencer Lewis was here, he decided to visit areas around the Bay Area. And he mentions that on his very first visit, first actually he went to Los Angeles, and in 1918, in his very first presentation in California, a very interesting experience occurred. Let me read a little bit about this. As he was speaking to an auditorium filled with people, suddenly he became aware of a presence that was over the room, with a face looking right at him. And he says, there in front of me in the center of the auditorium, and only slightly below the level of the platform on which I stood, was the most beautiful figure and face I have ever seen. The supremely grand figure and personality gazed steadily at me, and about it came the most perfect violet aura that my eyes have ever witnessed. It did not move, but the smile of encouragement that greeted me told the story of the coming of the time, and I knew that the hour struck, and all of nature's forces were in accord, working to bring about the transition I was awaiting. At this time, the room began to shake. and many people there experienced these vibrations. In fact, it was reported in the Los Angeles newspapers that although a significant earthquake was reported at that exact time, no one in the entire city had been injured. Now, H. Spencer Lewis used the term the Great Transition or the Great Transit. And he didn't mean transition in the sense of dying, literally dying. As many of you know, H. Spencer Lewis was very knowledgeable about astrology. And this is a term that's used as you move from one phase to the other. And so he saw this, that in his 35th year, he was experiencing a great initiation in the sense of moving forward and receiving knowledge and this expression of love that completely transformed his life. Now, it didn't end in Los Angeles. In fact, he visited San Francisco, he visited Oakland, and when he went back to San Francisco and rested in his hotel room, he had what most people would call a dream, yet he said it was so real, it was beyond a dream, he was certain that he had experienced this. This was at the end of April in 1918, and he woke up in another location. It was in the location where we are now. He experienced being here, and this is the area that, as Frater Rich said, first with the Vizcaíno party that came here in late 1602 and 1603, they held a mass under an oak tree that was here, and then they had with them 7 priests of the Carmelite order who established in this area a presence of mystical and the mystical and the spiritual tradition. H. Spencer Lewis reports that some of them actually stayed behind for some time and were picked up later when the boat came back, and that the native people in this area were introduced to this mystical tradition that came from Europe. This is the Western esoteric tradition that has been perpetuated for centuries. Then, about 170 years later, to this very same spot, Junipero Serra, who was a priest, but was raised in a mystical tradition. In fact, he attended the university started and in honor of Raymond Lully, the mystical tradition in Mallorca, and was very familiar with the Western esoteric tradition. Although he came here with the support of the church, he also came here in order to continue and perpetuate this esoteric tradition. Now, H. Spencer Lewis was aware of all this. He had been informed of this when he was initiated in Toulouse, and he came back to this very location, this same mountain. And when he was here, he had experiences that are beyond the usual explanation. Let me share some of the things that he said about this. And I also want to mention that H. Spencer Lewis, in some monographs in the very highest degree in our archival series, describes some of his past incarnations. And in one of them, he states specifically that he lived in the late 1500s and early 1600s and traveled on this expedition with the Vizcaíno that came here, and that he was one of the Carmelite Descalstor, the shoeless priest who came here. His name was Padre Folio, and after living here with the native people for some time, he then traveled on to South America and passed the tradition on from there. So let me read a little bit about H. Spencer Lewis's experience when he came to this area. So he fell asleep and he woke up in a different place. I found in the room all